All right, let's round out the thinking at the State House as we've been doing all week.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Now, it's always interesting when we put the Friday program together. We try to goof off on Fridays, but because we have been touching the base of all the leadership in the State House over the course of the week, the Speaker of the House on Monday, the Governor on Tuesday, the Senate President on Wednesday, last night, the House Minority Leader, we are going to continue and wrap up with the Senate Minority Leader and get the pulse from Dennis Algiere, who I don't think has been on the program. Radio, yes, but television, no. These are always interesting conversations on Friday because we tape our Friday shows on Thursday. And I always mention that to you because in case something breaks loose locally or nationally, we're definitely in a position where we cannot react to it. We shall on Monday. And if something happens between the Senate President and the Speaker of the House in the next 24 hours from our taping time, which is Thursday afternoon, this has a chance of being semi-obsolete, but I think the concepts are going to be more or less intact. Here was the State of the State headline the other night, right, with the governor. I think you've seen that all week long, and the Senate Minority Leader is here to talk about it. Welcome. Good to see you.
How you doing? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. What was your overall take on the State of the State?
State of the State, not unlike other states of the states, is generally a pep rally. There's not too many specifics on the State of the State, and it's generally an opportunity for the governor, he or she, to tout the state and talk about successes. That's generally what happens. The details of the State of the State is the next day, generally the next week, is the budget. And the governor generally outlines his or her, in this particular case, her plans for the upcoming fiscal year in the budget. And that's when we as legislators get the specifics as to what direction she wants to go in, right, and what direction the legislature wants to go in. And it involves, as you know, Dan, a very deliberate process that's very open. Hearings are held, committee hearings, subcommittee hearings, and the budget is vetted. And there's a lot of time spent by members of the General Assembly and staff in going through the budget.
So I want to talk to you about some general principles that the governor brought forward and some, I think, meaty issues that need to be discussed. But there's a thing going on right now between the House and the Senate in terms of policy, procedure, power. There was a dinner 2 nights ago, as we taped last night, that you participated in.
Yes.
Whose idea was that, by the way?
That was my idea.
That's what I heard.
I wanted to get the Speaker and the President together and have a beer and just talk personally, not politics, and an attempt to break the ice so we could further discuss, the direction we want to go in. Listen, at the end of the day, when there's no communication between the House and the Senate, no one wins. And we need to communicate. And this part of the political process, it's not the first time this has happened. It happens for whatever reason. But I thought it would be a good idea for the two of them to get together. What happened? It morphed into the 5 of us getting together and having a nice dinner.
All right, we'll talk about some of that as we go. Jess, I'm going to call an audible here. If you would, provide me the slightly longer version of the conversation we had with the Senate President the other night on the relationship between the Speaker of the House and he. It runs a couple of minutes, but I'd like to get the Senate Minority Leader's perspective on this. Things tough between you and the Speaker right now?
I was hoping to have a better relationship at this point in time with the Speaker. I know we had a little stumbling block going back with the budget. I was hoping our relationship would improve, but it doesn't seem to be the case.
What's the genesis, or what's at the foundation, or what's the cause?
Well, we have some issues now. I have a substantial number of vacancies in the Senate Policy Office and in the Senate Fiscal Office, and I was hoping that I could fill those vacancies, but I'm being blocked at this point in time from filling those vacancies, and it's a huge impediment to the operation of the Senate right now. We are severely shorthanded.
Thus, the threat of lawsuit last week, correct?
We have thoughts as to an avenue we could approach in the event of we don't come to an agreement as far as filling those vacancies and providing the appropriate staff so the Senate can operate in its normal methods.
And these decisions come through the little-known entity called the JCLS. known to you, but not the average everyday citizen, the Joint Committee on Legislative Services, where members of the House and the Senate convene to form the operating body, if you will, of the whole General Assembly. So you're suggesting, now we're moving off the paw socks here for a second, but everything kind of seems to be in the same mix of grinding discontent. You're potentially going to litigate against the House Speaker to perform through the JCLS to fill these vacancies, and what else?
Well, I was hoping to get a meeting with the JCLS because I think...
A formal get-together. That's not
correct.
Dinner. That's a formal legislative meeting.
Yes, a formal meeting of the JCLS.
And there are, what, 5 members?
There are 5 members. There's the Speaker, there's the House Majority Leader, there's the House Minority Leader, there's the Senate Minority Leader, and there's the Senate President.
Okay.
There's 5 members.
So you're pre-powwowing right now to try to see if you guys can get on a more even playing field and understand each other a little bit.
I'm hoping that we can have a viable discussion to alleviate the situation, and hopefully we can move on, and the Senate can get cracking on what we normally do, and that's the people's business.
Okay. So what happened to that end at this meeting of dinner on Wednesday evening?
Well, first, I mean, it's not uncommon to have friction between the houses, and I think that's the way it was meant to be honest with you. Nothing was meant to be easy in the democratic process. And I've been up there, 26 years or so, or perhaps just a little less. There's always been friction, and it's unfortunate. There's a little bit of communication problems right now, but I'm confident that'll all work out. Last evening, 5 of us had dinner, and we discussed personal things.
By the way, you guys forgot to invite Patricia Morgan, the 5th person. She had to invite herself, she told us.
No. Well,
that's what she told us.
Originally, the dinner was only going to be just a few people. And she did want to be included, and absolutely. And we invited Joe Shirkachi as well. So the 5 of us had dinner. And
that's the whole doggone JCLS.
Sure.
Had a nice little dinner together.
Yes.
Not in a formal meeting of the JCLS by any
we would
stretch.
have invited you too.
You would have?
We would have, sure.
Yeah, next time do that.
We did not.
I'm sure that people would love my perspective on these things.
We did not discuss politics. It was very personal, and it was an opportunity to perhaps clear the air by discussing family, a number of things. It was very personal. There was no politics. I know that's hard to believe.
No, it's not hard to believe.
But that was all. It was just, and you know what? It broke the ice, and I think because of that, I think it'll be a little bit easier for some of the issues that we have to be worked out.
Yeah, well, I'm told by Representative Morgan that when you guys left, they went and had a drink and worked it out.
Probably did, sure. I hope they did.
Yeah.
Hope they did.
So you don't have any information as to whether or not whether the Senate's going to be suing the House?
I don't think we're going to sue the House.
You haven't had a formal meeting of the JCLS since 2006.
Probably you're right. Yeah.
So you run a $45 million operation, ballpark, running the whole damn government, and the formal entity that's responsible for it hasn't had an official meeting since 2006.
Well, that budget goes through the same budget process as the budget we have before us. So we just don't throw out a number. It's a process. But no, we have not had a meeting since 2006.
So the Senate President, what would you call him in relation to you? I mean, you're the Senate Minority Leader. Is he an ally? Is he a political adversary? Is he both? What is he to you?
I consider him a political ally. At times we don't agree on issues, and there's many issues we don't agree on. However, he's always been a gentleman to me, and you know, it's politics. There's going to be disagreement, just as you and I have disagreements.
Well, tell me,
but he's always been a gentleman. Whoever's been in that seat, to be honest with you, Dan, I've never had any problems with anyone in that particular seat.
So talk to me about the interesting contrasts here. Most people view politics by party. Of course, you know, Washington has been a zoo that way. We're more polarized than ever, right? Democrats and Republicans. But right now, it seems to me it's more House and Senate than it is Democrats and Republicans.
It's always been that way. It's always been that way.
Because we have too few Republicans?
We have few Republicans, but it's always been House and Senate. It's always been that way. There's a constituency in the House, there's a constituency in the Senate. We as elected officials have our own constituencies. And it's a hierarchy. But there's politics between the two chambers. There's politics between the legislative and executive branch. We don't have that many numbers in the Republican Party. I try to get my point across. I do so sometimes in meetings or having discussions with my colleagues. But
so tell me, do you think the Senate President is correct when he says he needs more people, and that Mattiello's holding up his people for, say, policy positions?
Well, I have confidence in the Senate President when he said he needs a position filled or two. I know we have some positions that are have opened up in the fiscal office, and during the budget, negotiations and budget deliberations, it's very important that we have fiscal folks in those particular positions to assist us going through thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of a budget. So that I clearly understand. We have a policy, a position that's opened up. We're dealing with constituent issues. We're dealing with significant policy issues. We're not full-time legislators. We depend upon staff, and it's important to have qualified staff to assist us and our constituents.
Representative Morgan, the minority leader on the other side, said to us last night that she thinks that we should minimize it and merge policy people.
Oh, that's something we can put on the table.
Across the board, House and Senate.
That's something to look at, sure.
Okay, when we come back, the thing that really has tilted the balance issue is the pawn stocks conversation. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. The Senate bill is dead in the House, as written.
The Senate bill is dead in the state of Rhode Island. 2/3 of the Rhode Islanders do not support it, and therefore the House will not support it.
It's been a theme all week long here. You should have been around last night for this. If you weren't, foxprovidence.com, you can catch every show in addition to seeing it twice on TV each night. The minority leader in the House was telling me, oh, no, it's not 2/3, it's 3/4. She has her own polling data. Do you believe that?
I have not seen any of the polling data.
Do you believe that's the pulse?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't want to guess. I wouldn't want to guess.
How did you vote?
I voted no.
Why?
For a couple of reasons. But before I say why, I'd like to get into the process in the Senate, which was a very lengthy process. A number of hearings were held throughout the state, and the Senate Finance Chairman and his committee spent a lot of time, along with staff, in going through the legislation. And I give him a lot of credit for that. It was very transparent, gave an opportunity to go around the state, on the road, and hear the pros and cons. At the end of the day, I voted no. But I want to just make sure the public understands the process was very open.
Why'd you vote no?
Listen, I support the Pawtucket Red Sox. They're an institution in our state. It's a great venue for people to go, grab a beer and watch a game with your family. And, I mean, it's ball, and I love baseball. However, my concern at the end of the day is the risk to the taxpayer. That is, if there's a default by the city of Pawtucket or the state, again, we're now going back to the taxpayers for money to pay for the ballpark. When indeed, in my opinion, the investors, the owners...
How would there be a default by the state?
Well, the state wouldn't default. It would be more the city, and we would not default. When I perhaps...
There are mechanisms
you're right.
built in.
I shouldn't have said default with the state. It would, if the numbers don't work out, for example, it's all based upon a pro forma. How much money they're going to make, and how much money is going to come back through taxes or other streams. I just don't feel the numbers work out, and I feel there's still too much of a risk to the taxpayer, and I think the owners or the investors should take more of a risk.
How much more?
I don't know how much more, but right now I think it's a little...
How responsible is it to suggest that they should take much more risk and then tell me you don't know how much more risk?
It's their ballpark. It's their ballpark. It's their ballpark.
I don't understand this.
Yeah.
The people come at this from all different directions. You come from your own. I respect your thinking, but how do you tell me that there's not enough risk and then not tell me what the risk threshold for is to satisfy you?
If Pawtucket defaults on their bonds, the taxpayers of Rhode Island have to pay for that. Perhaps they should be guaranteeing the Pawtucket bonds.
You want the Paw Sox to backstop Pawtucket?
Oh, yeah, and I just think generally speaking, Dan, the taxpayers are concerned again with the state coming up, borrowing money, taxpayers' money, to build a private ballpark.
What is this concept of the city of Pawtucket? It is amazing to me that legislators view Pawtucket as this inept little kid that can't take care of its business. The likelihood of defaulting on these bonds is slim and none, and Slim just left town. Municipal officials have an obligation to prioritize and fund that which is their debt. Now, there is backfill with the state in terms of the maneuver with education. It can't be education money, but there's no dispute that the state has a little bit of a backdrop. I mean, a backstop to the Pawtucket funding, which was a concern of the Senate, and it was built in. So you didn't think it was built in enough. But the idea that this multi-million-dollar operation known as the City of Pawtucket can't figure out its own funding, it's just insulting to municipal and the residents of that city, as if, you know, we got too much centralized government in this state as it is. I thought you were a Republican, by the way.
I am.
Yeah. Any philosophies match up with what you're thinking?
Actually, you're right there. But you're absolutely correct there.
I mean,
can't argue with
your
that
philosophy
one.
doesn't match a Republican in the state. That's why in this state no one knows who the hell anybody is.
I think that the owners and the investors have the wherewithal to put a little bit more up. I think they do.
Cash?
Cash.
Cash or co-guarantee?
And guaranteeing. Cash and guaranteeing.
Yeah, I'm not so sure what the legal issues are with a private entity actually being a guarantor of a municipal debt.
If you look at the legislation,
I've never seen that.
The legislation that was written for the development agency, that was the blighted areas, the second piece of legislation. I believe there's language in there that allows a private developer to do things that they wouldn't otherwise have to be able to do.
Nonetheless, the arguments are interesting.
No, and you know, I respect both sides of this. I can understand why Pawtucket wants the ballpark.
Like their economic livelihood.
Sure.
They're going to be Disneyland or a dump in about 18 months.
I can understand that. And the mayor is doing his job. The mayor is doing his job. And I respect the process that's taken place. And until some of my concerns are met or addressed, I just have concerns.
So tell me, have you ever...
I have an open mind in this process.
Okay, have you ever seen a situation where the Senate, at least... this thing, I'm interested in your take on the balance of power, that the Senate did pick the ball up, literally, and ran this process, clearly has tilted and affected the relationships between the two bodies. There's no... Don't dispute that. That's indisputable.
Okay.
Right?
Sure. Anytime there's legislation, there's a disputable legislation, especially something as huge as the Pawtucket Red Sox. There's going to be some licking of wounds. There's going to be some some hard feelings.
But have you ever seen this? Have you ever seen the Speaker of the House or the Senate President in all your years at the legislature declare something dead and then have a hearing on it?
I haven't. I haven't. But you know what? At the end of the day, if the leadership majority wants this to work out, it'll work out. I think the process in the House will continue. If I had to guess right now, I don't have a crystal ball. I think there might be some tweaking of the legislation. If I had to guess, maybe perhaps some type of a hybrid piece of legislation, and maybe it'll all work out. But it's a process, and listen, nothing was meant to be easy. This is the taxpayers' money. This is the taxpayers' money, and you know and you have the radio show. You have your callers call in. They're concerned these days. The taxpayers. They're concerned.
Yeah, because you guys,
it's their money.
Because you guys didn't do your job. Not only are they concerned in general for time immemorial about what's going on with their taxpayer money, but you guys all dropped the ball collectively and taken responsibility for 38 studios, and you have soured.
This has nothing to do with 38 studios.
The negative response to this project has nothing to do with the sentiment of 38 studios?
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said this has nothing to do with 38 studios. This is not. You can't compare this process.
You mean the project?
Or this legislation
Agreed.
With 38 studios.
100%. But the way people feel about it?
If we did not have a 38 studio,
we wouldn't have this problem.
Absolutely.
And you guys, as a collective group, dropped the ball in accountability on what happened there.
I disagree with that, but I think this is going to go on for a long time in the state because of 38 studios.
Amen
Unfortunately.
All right, we'll take a list of some of the governor's major issues when we come back. Stay with us. All right, so in that great building, the Minority Leader in the Senate has been working here. What's it, a quarter century? You don't look any older for the wear and tear.
I had black hair when I started, and it's now gray.
Yeah, join the crowd. $1 billion for schools. What else do you think is the big to-do. By the way, we already spent $500 million on the schools.
Well, you bring up a good point. There was a committee set up to review or explore and study the school construction and maintenance. If we go forward and provide further funding for school renovations, rehabilitation, there has to be some strings attached. We can't continue to go into cities and towns that do not have a maintenance plan in place. They're deferring asset protection, they're not maintaining the buildings, and instead of fixing a leak in a roof, now we have to replace entire roofs. Instead of painting windows, we have to replace entire windows now. We cannot continue down this path.
It's a shared responsibility.
And there has to be strings attached if we're going to provide funding to cities and towns. Granted, the state will provide more funding. We do need to make schools more safe. We do need to make schools more healthy. We need to remove asbestos. We need to remove leaky pipes. We need to make sure the furnaces work and the roofs don't leak. Basic, fundamental stuff. Same stuff they're trying to do in DOT, fix roads and bridges. But before we give the money, we have to sit down and talk to cities and towns. You need a maintenance plan. Even though they're supposed to do that now, we're not doing our job following up with that.
Give me 30 seconds on the deficit. I mean, how do we cure this perpetual problem?
We have a $60 million this year. Going forward, about $200 million. What happens, and this is not an easy thing, we're relying on one-time revenue sources. And when you rely upon one-time revenue grabs, you automatically have a deficit. It's structural.
Think it's smart to budget $23 million in revenue on a Supreme Court decision that's yet to come in sports gambling?
It's in the budget, and perhaps it shouldn't have been in the budget. But I feel there are many that feel they're confident that the Supreme Court's going to rule in favor of the states to allow the gambling. If they do, we have to be ready in the starting blocks. Massachusetts is, Connecticut is. We're going to have to be ready. It's in the budget. That's the governor's proposal. I think we're going to have to look at that very carefully in the legislature because we are relying on something right now that's not there.
Real quick, show me Senator Kettle, if you will. This young man, I think, was elected when he was 12, but he's a good guy. He got jammed up, I don't know, with his girlfriend. Some state police inquiry is going on right now. What bothers me is that members of your body are already #MeTooing on his chest, like he's creating a cloud by his existence. No charge. I haven't spoken with him. He's part of your contingent of Republicans. A, do you support him? B, are you going to, as a minority leader, back off the Nestlebushes of the world who are saying that he's creating a cloud by his very existence? Or do we, or in America, do we just indict and all of that without a charge?
No. All I know is what I read in the paper or listen.
You haven't talked to Nick about it?
I have discussions, but we have not had anything specific, and I'm sure he's getting advice from his attorney, and rightly so. However, he has not been charged with any offense. There was an investigation, and at this time, since he's not charged with any offense, I think it should just play out, and he continues his role as a senator, and I'm confident he can fulfill his duties and obligations.
Does somebody step up in the chamber and address this stuff, point of personal privilege, and say, hey, knock it off until we get an outcome on this whole thing?
I have not heard anything that's going to affect his abilities to continue as a senator at this time.
Is it not unfair piling on or premature piling on by Senator Nesselbush?
Again, all I can say is no charges have been filed against the senator, and he's going to remain in his seat at this time.
Yeah, don't be a stranger. Good to see you.
All right, nice to see you.
Senator Algiere, your minority leader in the Senate. Back with a final word. I've had a real study in leadership, I think, over the course of the last week, and the guy who runs the Bryant Institute for Leadership will be here to talk about it. Gary Sass will be our Monday guest, so have a great weekend, relax, no Patriots to worry about, although I don't think a lot of you are worrying, but enjoy the off week. See ya, and on Monday on the radio at 3 on WPRO. Good night.